So let's assume you have you're fiddling around with the V3 stuff. You're having a good time. So you're thinking about looking to create a plugin. So here I have a studio. It's based on the Next.js starter kit. And I'm gonna just move some of the pages into a different section and been playing around a little bit with some WebGL stuff just for fun. So let's say you have this little schema where you have made a little custom component. In this case, there's a slider here, so you can change the values of my graphics shaders here to get the better feel for how it's working. If you want to do some quick edits. This is also, incidentally, I won't go into it because this is not actually about making the plugin code in and of itself. It's everything else. But just hinting some of the stuff that you have in V3 now. This is an array. It has a lot of different configuration for each item, but the most important thing, the stuff you're editing a lot, that's inlined in the items now. So this is just a small little custom component. And then I also have this custom component here, which I thought I'd use as an example, which will be the basis for a plugin. So let's say I have multiple studios and I want to have this slider component in all of them, right? So I want to have something that I can ship everywhere because I don't want to have to copy paste this code every time. So starting with that, you actually have to deal with the world we're living in now, and that's the world of NPM packages. We need a repository. We need to host this on GitHub or somewhere, and then we have to publish it to NPM. Then we have to make sure that this package we have made actually works in all of the different JavaScript runtimes that are out there now. You have the Next.js stuff, you have Dino, you have the old school CommonJS stuff, ESM. There are so many buzzwords and so much stuff going on. And personally, I find it really daunting and really hard to make a package for NPM from scratch. So what we've been trying to do is to make for V3, we've tried to make what we're calling the Sanity plugin kit, which is supposed to remove a lot of the boilerplate that goes into this stuff. So with that said, let's get to it. We'll start on the command line here. The first thing we want to do is just to show you what we will be using. It's this package here, or this command line interface, the Sanity plugin kit, which is a way to initialize plugin, upgrade V2 plugins to V3, and also to inject opinionated config to remove a lot of boilerplate to make things go faster. So I guess with that said, please don't start making your coffees so I can get a little bit of a head start, but let's see here. So the first command we will be running here is this one, the npx sanity plugin kit, which is our package. This is just a node command runner. And we want to use the init command and then the name of the plugin we want to make. In this case, I'll call it the silly slider demo. So let's hit this one, and it's asked me, do we want to install this new version that I released since last time I tested it? Okay, let's do it. Okay. For this plugin, I want to be myself. Here's my email. Let's call it Sanity plugin silly slider demo. And then which license do we want to use? Let's use the MIT license, and this will be for demo purposes only, because we may or may not end up publishing this to NPM, so let's not have people installing this nilly-willy. We'll get back to the repository URL, but then we hit enter here, and boom, boom, boom. Which package manager do you prefer? In this case, I want to use NPM. And I mean, don't hold the npm install command against me, but here we go. So what it's actually doing now, it has created a bunch of files, as you can see. It made a package.json, a license file, a README, a bunch of boilerplate files. In this case, we're opinionated, giving you prettier and ESLint config that we sort of prefer ourselves. You could add additional command line parameters to the config here if you wanted to opt out of some of these. I might take a look at the help page for the command as well, just to show you what it looks like. Always fun looking at installing. But let's see. There we go. So let's now initialize. Let's see here. I have a couple of silly folders here, but cd silly slider demo. So inside this folder, let's initialize our Git repository. Then we add all of the files. And this is what it looks like. Now we have essentially a bunch of configuration files in a modern JavaScript project. There is a lot of fluff. The most important thing here to pay attention to is that we have our package JSON file. This is where most of the boilerplate is hidden. It has added a bunch of plugins that will just make developer life easier. It is opinionated, so you could always opt out of these if you wanted to. There is some stuff that makes sure that our plugins will show a friendly warning if you install it in a studio of version 2, because version 3 plugins don't work in the second or studio version 2. And it also makes sure to use the latest and greatest dependency versions for all of these. And then there is this bit, which essentially is taking care of all of the nitty-gritty details of how you're actually building a modern JavaScript NPM package that will be publishable and usable in a multiple of settings. I won't go into the details of this, but just know that we're trying to have your best intentions at heart here. And then there is a couple of extra steps here. We have a pre-build script. There is some pre-publish only stuff. And all of this is here to make sure that when you build, if I do npm run build, it should make sure that if this completes with a success, then we at least have something that should work. You know, this is all here to just make sure that we don't publish stuff that's broken to npm. Now, having done all that, I think we should just test this out of the box. The plugin kit has a quick guide set up here, which will go through all of what we're talking about here. So the next step now is actually to run this run link watch command. So it's a little bit fiddly if you have one package and want to test it in another studio. So we're also trying to automate and make it as smooth as possible to do that. So let's now, we have our package. It doesn't really do anything. I'll show you actually the code which we will be testing. And that's in the source file folder. And it's just this index file. So this is all just documentation. And you can see it imports the define plugin config from Sanity. And then it defines the absolutely simplest plugin that's possible in Sanity at the moment. And that's a plugin that only has a name and it doesn't do anything. But as a side effect of being initialized, it will do a console log. So that's what we will be looking for. So let's just now install this plugin into our studio. And once we see that it's all hooked up correctly, we will move the slider code into this plugin. So let's go. So we go. There is some stuff going on. It spams a lot of stuff, but over and over again, it tries to tell you if your studio is using yarn, copy this command. If you're using npm, use this command. Since we're using npm in this case, I will copy this command. I will go to my playground studio. I will, in another shell, I will paste this. And now it will install the package locally. So we're not publishing to npm, but we have like a local repository set up that makes it so that I can now import my plugin here, which is the default name. And we'll see this one, Sanity plugin silly slider demo. We'll add that to my plugin list in the studio, which is now here. And then we'll go back to our playground studio, open up the command line, and here we will see hello from Sanity. This was tiny. Let me see if I can increase the font size here on this one. Yeah. So here we can see, I'll just close the 3D preview. Here it is. And just to show you now that this is running now in the command line here in a watch mode. And that would mean that if I edited the file, let me just open a tool that I'm a little bit more comfortable with than doing a edit on from the command line. There is a silly project, and we'll do the silly slider project instead. I'm an old school Java guy, so that's why I'm using IntelliJ. Please don't sue me. So here we have our plugin. It's running here, and if we now go into the source command line tool, I'll just change the console log not change it. If I save here now, this should update, and it should immediately update in the studio. So now you can actually run code changes, and you can have quite a fast reload. I must just be clear that since we have moved the code or have the code in a different repository, there is a little bit of overhead where it has to build the files and then push it to the studio, but at least you have live reload and you can really work quickly like this. So with all that said, let's try to now move the code that I had from the Playground Studio. It doesn't really matter what it does, it's just all in here. I'll copy paste that, go to my little slider thing, I'll override everything in here. And now, of course, the README is not up to date, but what we're having here, we're exporting number range input, which we're already using here. But in the existing studio, the plugin is imported from the local path. But let's now instead import this from our package that we hopefully updated. It did not. Let's just see if my sorry. Let's see if we can nudge this to work. Something happened. Now at least we got a little bit of a compiler here. It says that my plugin doesn't exist. That's right, because we removed that. Now instead of exporting my plugin, which is the default plugin name from Plugin Kit, we are now hopefully still not exporting the thing. Let's give it a little bit of a kick. Maybe it was overwhelmed my copy pasting so much code at once. Just let's see. Oh yeah, I did not necessarily test this, did I? Let's see. Yeah, here it is. So now it's been built, it's been pushed to the local repository, it's imported into the studio, and we can see that it's still working. There's a slider here, and let's make a code change in the slider demo to make sure that it is as we want to. We can go down to some of this stuff. Let's make this, wrap this in a card. And now, just like it's let's do padding. Add some padding and just a border. And if everything goes according to plan, then this should have worked right now. But it's not, which is great, to be honest. Yeah, we can see it added a border. Yeah, so it seems just this next setup is actually lingering the errors. So as you can see here in the studio now, it has added a border around the slider. Okay, so this is how you can set and test, have your code in another repository, and you can have it live reload in your studio. So that's all well and good. Now, that's cool and all, but at this point, we actually need to publish it to NPM. So To do that, we need some help, because we could always just publish this from our local development machine, but that's not necessarily a good idea, because it works on my machine. It is not always the best way to go about things. So instead, let's make a workflow for our plugin. In this case, we will use the inject command from Sanity plugin kit. In this case, we're injecting a preset, the semantic version workflow. So let's go. In this case, I think I actually forgot to commit everything. So let's just see what this did in my prepared delete me repository, because it's exactly the same. This has a couple of commits, but what this command now did, it added a lot of new things. And in this case, it added a GitHub workflow. It added some pre-commit hooks. It added some helper functions and even more opinionated stuff. And this is all to make sure that we can have a workflow. So if you commit this code after injecting, push that to GitHub, then you will end up with a workflow that looks exactly like this. And this will work in such a way that every time you push code, it will build it and will tell you if it's failed or was okay. And then you can also go into the workflow here and choose to do a release. When you click here, we can choose to run or not to run tests in the project. And once you hit run workflow, it will go through a lot of steps. So here I've done one example where I'm skipping the tests, and what it will be doing then, since it's not, it will mostly be installing plugins, but it will build the whole package. If you're using TypeScript, you have extra safety. It will type check everything. It will build your artifacts, verify that it's following typical Sanity plugin conventions. If you want to, it will run all of the tests if you have any. And in the end, it will do an automated release, which will figure out the next version based on your commit messages and publish that directly to NPM. So just before the meetup started here, I did that. I changed just a little bit of a thing in a plugin. I pushed the change, and this version was automatically published to NPM. I might be rushing this bit a little bit, but there's also a lot of stuff that goes into this. And what we're trying to do here is make this as easy as possible to get an automated release pipeline that you can use wherever you want. And the place to look into this is this main YAML file. Everything should be very carefully commented, so every line should have some sort of reference to the GitHub documentation or why the line is there, because there is a lot of stuff going on, but it's also really nice that it's there because it takes care of a lot of things. If you want to learn more about the details on what this thing is doing, then we have documented there in the preset for the semantic workflow stuff. Here's how you run the commands, and a line of the functionality, the things that it's opting in for you, or stuff it's taking care of, and then a couple of things you have to take care of for it to work. So with that said, I think I could take any questions if there are any.
Awesome stuff. The chat is saying you are the hero we needed. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that, you know, like a lot of us aren't thinking about. We're just using it, and so it's amazing the work that was put in.
So I realized I sort of tripped myself up there with the copy pasting of code. I'm a little bit unsure what happened, but just to reiterate, so this semantic release preset, it's kind of opinionated because it adds a lot of what I would call and the price bloat. But be sure that we have added, we're using this for all of the plugins that we have ported to V3 this so far. I think it's 25 now. We're using this exact setup. We're running this command in every repository on the ecosystem team. We're dogfooding this as it were. We really try to make sure that this is helping us do more quicker. So essentially, my workflow now for porting plugins is actually just injecting a bunch of V3 configuration, fixing the code that's V2-like to make it V3-like, and that's it. And then you just hit publish, and it's out there.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. So how many Sanity plugins have you created, like you yourself?
Oh, no, let's not. This is definitely a team effort, and I feel like, I haven't actually. So there is so much great stuff in V2. As much as we're hyping V3 and everything, V2 is still a fantastic product, and we really want to make sure that at least as many of the most important plugins that we ourselves are maintaining, and hopefully the community feels strongly about, are ready for the V3 launch when it goes to general availability. So that's essentially what we've been doing, making sure that we have feature parity on the stuff that matters. So do chime in on. There is a GitHub discussions thread on the plugin. So we really would like to hear if there's anything major that's missing now. Of course, there is so much great plugin stuff for V2, and we definitely haven't been able to do all of it, but we are trying to do the most important ones.
Well, we do have a couple questions from the community. Cody wants more Sanity plugin silly demos. So the silly, we all liked that. But Martin was wondering, what is the plugin you're most excited to build with V3 outside of work?
Well, for me, it's sort of hinted here in. I really am excited about just making plugins for arrays, and there is so much stuff, using Sanity as like an expert tool for various things. I find that Sanity, it's so easy to make a schema that can control something. So having stuff like this, a slider, I really often, where you make small adjustments, it's handy to have a slider or some sort of interactive stuff that makes the editing experience a lot better. So it's all the small stuff, and the fact that we made it so easy now to hopefully to initialize and publish a plugin. Hopefully that should spur some initiatives in the community as well. So it's much easier to experiment and make plugins. And I feel like it's the configuration API you have defined. So if you have used V3 Studio at all, you'll find that the define config API is almost identical to the define plugin API. So if you have configured your studio, you basically have made your first plugin. So you can just ship it as a plugin if you wanted to.
Nice.
Which is great.
Excellent. And so the last question, can you ask what parts of the studio can you make a plugin for?
From an API point of view, now there is so many places. One of the great things about the V3 API, it's really expanding the horizon on what's configurable in the studio, and it also shows the way. First of all, it's all TypeScript now, so use your IDE to explore the API and find those crazy places where you can add extensions. There's studio components now. You can change your nav bar, you can change your logo, you can change multiple components in the studio already, and I wouldn't be surprised if more will come in the future. The new components API is just ridiculous. Some of the stuff that was reams of code, lines and lines of code in V2, that's in V3 now, it's just a couple of lines. And you have these props, render item, render input, render field for really encourage people to explore those because they're super, super powerful.
Awesome. And one last question that I have, actually. Do you have any tips or best practices that you would recommend of when deciding when to make a plugin and when not to make a plugin?
You know, I don't know if you saw this, but personally now, I don't write define config anymore. I just make plugins. Because the great thing, let me share the screen again, if we have time. Let's see, where did the button go? Here it is. I'll try to, because actually, that was the first thing I changed when starting a studio, where we're told, or it's very natural to start building your schema in the config and building, everything in line. But what very quickly happens is you have a lot of if statements after each other. You have a lot of mixed concerns. So
right.
I actually encourage you to, if you have let's go to the studio. So here's my studio config. So just note that, okay, the project ID, dataset, and title. Okay, schemas, but the rest is just plugins. So even the production URL, which opens the live the URL for the current document, I just made a little plugin for it because you see here's the plugin, and if I just X this out and paste it in here, now it's in config. So the only thing that's the difference here is that this one says define config, this one says define plugin, and it has a name, distinct name. And what's so great about this is you could have multiple plugins that, because all of the plugins have this nice little syntax where you can get the previous state. So you could build multiple plugins that work on the same APIs, but in slightly different ways, and they compose automatically. You don't have to have like if this or that, then go this direction. You just let the plugin do what it does. And so the same thing goes with the now I moved it out to a plugin, but let's move. If we go to the silly slider demo example here and just look at what the plugin here, that's essentially just a very small define plugin that says that. Okay, so let's just take this example. For the form input component, if it's a numbers input and it has an option that says range, then we want to use the new range input. Otherwise, just do whatever you do usually. And then we could have another plugin that also works on numbers input, but checks for some other option, and they would combine seamlessly. So that's really, really cool, I think. So just make plugins. I mean, don't even think about it, because once you have made it into a plugin, okay, so the live update wasn't on this demo day, wasn't the best example, but I mean, you can just, once it's in a defined plugin state, it's movable to another place.
Right. Excellent. I think that's all the questions we have.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Snorre. It's very helpful to see what's going on behind the scenes, but and thank you to all the community members who make plugins and anyone who makes a plugin. It's great work and we appreciate it. But
yes.